Great. So we are now live on the Facebook page, and then we'll just give folks another minute or so to start watching, and then I'll start.
Okay.
Alrighty, we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the virtual presentation on Washington's fire season 2020 with Angie Lane. I'm Rachel Bishop. I'm Wenatchee River Institute's Community Programs Manager. And before I introduce who we are and who Angie is, if you are watching through the Zoom webinar, the best way to ask questions throughout the talk is in the chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get the questions answered at the end of Angie's presentation. And if you're watching via Facebook Live, you can add your questions into the comments. And same thing, I will ask them at the end of the presentation. So when in Leavenworth, and our mission is to connect people, communities, and the natural world. And we do that through community programs and youth programs. And we have a 9-acre campus in Leavenworth, and our property is open to the public. So while we aren't hosting any in-person programs on our property right now, you are more than welcome to come enjoy our property. We have a winter-themed nature scavenger hunt for folks to use. We have a couple story walks for folks to read as a family and enjoy being outside. And the trails on our property also can park trails of Leavenworth, so you can explore our property and then continue on exploring along the Wenatchee River. So as you can imagine, our programs are a little different this year, and because of COVID, like I mentioned, we're not hosting any in-person programs right now because of the rise in number of cases in Leavenworth and in Chelan County. So our community programs are all virtual like this, and we have another speaker event in January on the 20th, and that one's actually going to be during the day, during lunchtime, so 12 to 1. And we have a tribal historian named Richard Hart, who's going to be doing a presentation on the Pisclosa or Wenatchee people and their fight for their fishing rights. And they spent just about 150 years fighting to get their fishing rights back on the Icicle and Wenatchee rivers. So you can tune in, same thing via Zoom webinar or Facebook Live, January 20th. And for our youth programs, we are doing virtual field trips with teachers throughout North Central Washington. And so we're meeting with teachers and their students via Zoom and doing field trips, 30-minute field trips with them on NGSS standards, and that's for kindergarten through 5th grade. So if you know any teachers who are looking for extra fun education for their students, have them contact us at Wenatchee River Institute. And for all future events, if you are not already signed up for our e-newsletter, that's the best way to find out what's going on at WRI. And you can do that by heading to our website, wenatcheeriverinstitute.org, and sign up for our newsletter. And it goes out just twice a month. And you can always unsubscribe if you find that you don't want it anymore. That's an option. Alrighty, so I am going to introduce our speaker tonight. So Angie Lane has held her current position as Assistant Division Manager for the DNR Wildfire Division for the last 1.5 years. She has a Bachelor's of Science from Eastern Oregon University in Multidisciplinary Studies and a graduate certificate from Oregon State University in Sustainable Natural Resources. Angie has worked in the fire protection arena for nearly 25 years. Prior to working for DNR, Angie worked for Oregon Office of Emergency Management as Oregon's State Hazard Mitigation Officer. Angie has also worked for the Oregon Department of Forestry as a National Fire Planning Coordinator, and facilitated the process for developing community wildfire protection plans and garnered grant funding for fuels treatment projects. Highest fire unit in the state of Oregon, and as a policy analyst and civil penalties administrator in the private forest division of ODF. I'd like to welcome Angie. Thank you so much for doing the presentation with us tonight, and you can go ahead.
All right, well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Whoops, gotta pick the right screen share. And I'll go ahead and start the presentation. Well, it didn't go to the beginning like I wanted it to. Okay, well, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can shut my video off just so I can retain some capacity here. And let me know if my sound is not good enough. So I was going to go over the impacts and costs of our wildfire season for 2020. And one thing I wanted to let folks know is the stats that I'm going to be sharing with you are Department of Natural Resources wildfire stats. I don't have like all fire stats, all acres, all that in Washington, because, you know, that isn't our responsibility in DNR to report those statistics. However, all of the agencies that protect land in Washington from wildfire do report to the Northwest Coordination Center, and it's easy to find. You just Google NWCC and you can find all the stats that you're interested in on that website. If you're curious about all fires, all agencies in Washington. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that the stats that we'll be talking about when we're talking about classified fires in Washington for DNR, we're talking about those fires that we're responsible for putting out, or we're assisting other agencies to put those fires out, or it's a threat to DNR protection. So we'll take action if the fire is going to come on to DNR land. So that's the framework we're in here tonight. For DNR, we have 6 regions across the state. You would be most from those folks that live in Chelan County or thereabouts would be most familiar with the Southeast region. They're based out of Ellensburg. And then we have the Northeast region in Colville. So you might have some familiarity with folks that come from Northeast region to help Southeast put out fires. There's our Northwest region in Sedro-Woolley. The Olympic region, the office is in Forks, South Puget's in Enumclaw. Our headquarters is in Olympia, Washington, and then our PC region is down there in Castle Rock. And those boundaries show their coverage area for all of the services that DNR provides. So not just wildfire. We're talking about state lands, forest practices, all of those things. You would talk to your local office if you're interested in getting help in those other areas. So this year for our fire season, we had to slow things down, if you will, in that we just don't go run out there and start doing training and things like that because of COVID. So we had to take a pause and really think about how are we going to get our training done? How are we going to get our work capacity done, testing done? our first aid, our CPR, all those things that are required of us each year as firefighters. And so we had to do a lot of mitigation planning for that. And then also, we're thankful that we had a stockpile of COVID personal protective equipment to use, like masks and gloves and sanitizer. We could get those from the emergency management office there here in Washington. Once they started getting those kinds of supplies, we were able to order out of the stockpile. But up until that point, we did invest some money in trying to purchase some of that PPE that everybody had a hard time finding. For DNR, we have 120 engines across the state. We pre-position those, especially during August and September, the height of the fire season, if you will. And so we're sharing and moving our resources across the state. We also have our own helicopters. We have 10 Type 2 helicopters and 1 Type 3. This year, because of COVID, our intent was we really needed to do all we could do to keep fires small, so that we didn't have a lot of large fires on the landscape where a lot of folks would congregate, and then we could potentially pass COVID around. So we went ahead and put on some Type 1 contracted helicopters, and we got a hold of 2 scoopers from Montana, in addition to the 5 contracted single engine air tankers that we already put on every year. So we had quite the aviation fleet this year. The governor declared an emergency for DNR later in the season so that we could bring in the National Guard. We were able to utilize their Blackhawks for water delivery, and then 3 crews that we sent to the Whitney fire, and then they went on to Chelan Complex. We also have 3 Type 2 hand crews. These are 20-person crews. We have Helitac resources, which are essentially aerial delivered firefighters that we base in Olympia and Yakima. And then we have our camps crews, our incarcerated individuals, and those are 10-person crews. So we have about 35 of those right now. And we hope to get 38, I believe, is the number we're trying to hit. We are part of a national system, so we're able to work with other federal agencies very readily from all over the nation. And then we have a lot of state-to-state agreements and our Northwest Compact with Canada in order to bring in additional resources. And we utilized all of that this year. Our aviation assets are in action here. This right here, you can see my little white arrow here. This is one of our DNR helicopters that we added tanks to, so they can carry quite a bit of water. Here's one of the Blackhawks that are in action. And then up here is one of the Type 1 helicopters that we had on contract. This is a K-Max. So we were very busy. Over 5 million gallons of water, 5.5 million gallons of water were delivered. We figure this is a very rough cost. We're working very hard on trying to, now that we do have, quite the aviation program, we're doing, we need to really dig into what the true cost of having this program is, but there's a lot of cost in being ready, pre-positioning aircraft, contracting aircraft, and then supporting large fires. However, any of the fires that we go to that are not our fires, that somebody else is using our aircraft, we're able to get reimbursed for those costs. Here's the 120 engines that I talked about scattered across all of the regions. Southeast region has 29 of those engines. They also have one of the 20-person Type 2 crews. So we're, pretty well staffed across the state. We also help other states. We get help from states. We turn around and do that for them when we're in our low time. And so we were all over the West this year. Again, anytime we go out of state and somebody else is hiring, finger quotes, our folks, we will be able to get a reimbursement for that, and that state that's ordering us will pay the bill, or that federal agency. This season, we had 3 events that shaped our fire season. We had a very dry spring that led into a very dry July. And then we had a dry lightning storm that came in mid-August. And being in those drought conditions all summer long, that gave us a little bit of concern when we saw that lightning coming in. So we were very prepared for that. We geared up, we pre-positioned, all those things you do to get ready for the event. And then the Labor Day wind event hit. I'll talk more about that event here in a little bit. Our fuel conditions were at or below critical thresholds for Eastern Washington. And then we also saw some very dry fuels starting to set up in our western side of the state. August, like I said, we didn't see a lot of moisture. The moisture we did see was minimal. And then in September, we had the hot and dry conditions for a prolonged amount of time. Then you get that high wind that we experienced during Labor Day weekend. And with the critical fuels, then we saw a lot of fire carried long distances during that time frame. In the Labor Day event, we experienced wind speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour with frequent gusts as high as 50. And so that was very concerning. So during that Labor Day event, you can see here that as of September 10th, this was what our drought conditions looked like. So we were definitely in severe drought here in the center, and then surrounded by abnormally dry conditions. The red flag warning for that time period, which is, critical fuels and then a weather event that's going to carry and make large fires, that red flag warning was in place September 7th, 8th, and 9th. We also had wind advisory for high winds during the 7th and 8th. However, we did experience wind every day, it seemed like, for quite a few days after the Labor Day event. The tree damage that took place from the wind, we had some fires where the trees fell on power lines, and that potentially caused fires to start. Everything is under investigation. You really have to tease out what really caused the fire, so that takes some time. So I would offer that folks not immediately jump to power line. Also, we had 39 new fires started during that time frame on September 7th alone. The strong winds that resulted, we had a fire called Cold Springs Fire. That fire burned 50 miles north to south on the 7th. And because of the high wind, our aviation resources were limited in response. And then also later, when we started getting all this smoke influx from California and Oregon into Washington, that visibility made it poor for our aviation folks as well. Some of the stats for Washington. This picture, by the way, if you didn't think fires burned on the west side, they do. This is in the on the Olympic there peninsula. We had a fire. It wasn't our fire, but it was still, we helped with it. Anyway, for our fire stats for DNR, our fires in most regions were at or above our 10-year average for the number of DNR fires. And then our large fires that we consider DNR large fires, we had a mix of fuels included, but primarily non-forested fuel type was where our fires burned. But the total acres this year were 273,000, so roughly 274,000 acres for large fire for DNR in Washington. The acres burned on the east side, so you can see that we had quite a few acres. Again, grassy fuels, wind, critical dried fuels, dried out fuels. You can understand why these acres are so high. but they did exceed the 10-year average and also what burned in 2019. The brown indicates 2019 acres. West side regions, we had quite a bit of activity in the Northwest region and in our South Puget Sound region, and also PC, Pacific Cascade. Our fire starts this year, this is something that we're hoping folks can help. It takes a village, but we did have 85% of our fire starts were human caused. A lot of those fires, we had quite a few that were during the spring, and you know, escaped debris piles or open burning that escaped from folks. So that we need to do better there. And so we hope to get the message out this next year that folks need to be very wary if they're going to be pile burning or anything like that. Even though you have a permit, you can still be dealing with an escape fire. This year, we just didn't see the lightning that maybe we normally see. Like I said, I referenced that one weekend that we got the majority of our lightning fires, so only 4% of those were lightning. And then we do have 11% of our fires that are still under investigation. And once the investigation yields what caused the fire, then they will fall into either human or natural. We break down our cause categories, by all of these activities that are conducted by people. And then we have our lightning category as well. And then here's under investigation and undetermined. That's just where, you know, there's just no evidence to show us what could have caused that fire. You can make some guesses, but if you don't have the evidence, then it's hard to say what the actual cause was. The miscellaneous category, it's kind of misleading, but you know, it's sort of a catch-all. But if we had more specific causes, then you would see that miscellaneous would be a lot lower because we could put it into something. Okay, so for Chelan County, I decided to go ahead and just focus in a little bit since we're kind of in the heart of Chelan County. DNR protection is the hashed mark, and I know it's hard to see. And then we also have a lot of protection provided by Chelan County Fire Protection District. So, you know, I'll share this PowerPoint and I can share this map too, so that you guys could maybe send it out to your group and they could blow it up and really look at where is our protection in the private land of Chelan County. But we do have a lot of forested acres, and then the non-forest is also broken out here. For Chelan County, there were 5 large fires in the county this year. They weren't to the tune of any of the fires that we saw in the rest of Eastern Washington, but they still, they took a lot of good coordination, and I think a lot of good saves, if you will, people getting right on these fires and keeping them, in my opinion, smaller than probably what they could have been. There was the Sunset Fire, north of Wenatchee here. We have the Gun Range Fire, Kalakam. Then there was Chickaman, which was one of those fires that was kind of both direct and indirect strategy. But you guys may have, if anybody was doing any driving around near Lake Chelan, maybe you saw that thing smoking quite a bit this fall. And then there was the Apple Fire right here west of, I believe that's 97. So for the fires here, we've got them broken down into what's human and those kinds of things. Gun Range was a human cause fire. It's still under investigation. So is Sunset. Gun Range was 100 acres. Sunset was 143. You know, the costs were fairly inexpensive in the world of wildland firefighting. Colocum started in July, as well as Chickaman. Both of those fires, we had one structure damaged or destroyed. And then our acres on both of those fires were over 2,000. And then you can see that, you know, once you start getting up there and you've got quite a bit of fire on the landscape, you know, using a lot of aircraft, a lot of crews to put them out, mop up, that kind of thing, then you start seeing costs go up. So the Colocum fire was a DNR fire. The Chickaman fire was a Okanagan-Wenatchee forest fire. And then Apple Acres 5,500 human cause, that started during that wind event. So just thought I'd share a few photos. Gun range, you know, like I said, it started on June 18th. The cause is under investigation, but it's definitely a human cause fire. The fire burned on lands protected by DNR Southeast region. You can see here the fuels were grass. Sunset Fire, you know, this was 143 acres, started on July 13th. I saw some news reports on, you know, maybe they found somebody who caused this fire, but again, the investigation is not done. So right now we'll just call it human. The fire was 4.5 miles northwest of Wenatchee, and it burned on DNR Southeast region protection. We also had assistance from fire service and federal folks. And this fire was in grass and no real threat to homes, although folks got right on it. Colocum, here's a photo of the Colocum fire. It burned, started on July 24th. The cause is unknown on this one. And I don't know if we're going to get more specific about that or not. I didn't have time to check into that, but right now we just don't have a good reason to know what started that fire. It burned on lands protected by DNR. Again, it was 3 miles southwest of Malaga. It burned primarily in brush and grass. There were 10 minor structures that were threatened, and one was actually destroyed. The Chickaman fire, this is the one that kind of sat on the landscape for a while, waiting for one of those season-ending events. There were folks on there providing direct attack, but then also they utilized some indirect tactics, the forest did, to mitigate against steep terrain and snags. Those are, you know, things that are very concerning for firefighter safety. The fire did burn in timber and brush. And then Apple Acres, which started on September 7th. This fire is under investigation, but we are calling it human. Oh, shoot. Please ignore this statement. That was a different fire. But you can see here the fuels, you know, grass, some trees, brush. We did have an IMT that that came in to manage both Apple Acres and Pearl Hill. So, and then for this fire, we didn't have any threats. While there's structures there, nothing was damaged or destroyed. And I think there was pretty good protection there for those folks. For DNR, just so people know, as of September 30th, we had to turn in a report to the legislature, and especially regarding our fire costs and where our fires were located. So these types are the level to which the fire is being managed. And so a type 5 fire is like a campfire you respond to and put out. And then as you get up on types going from 4 to 2, it just means that the complexity has the fire's gotten more complex. You know, there's infrastructure involved, homes involved, people involved, values at risk involved, you know, cultural resources, that kind of thing. And so then you need a more robust management of that fire. And so 75% of our fires this year, the costs were wrapped up in those type 2 incident management team fires. We had 3 incidents that exceeded 500,000. If you compiled all the type 4 fires together, we spent about $2.4 million on those fires, and then $1.6 million on the type 5 fires. DNR was involved in 16 incidents where we had a cost share with another agency, so there will be shared costs involved. And then we're going to be seeking reimbursement from FEMA for 7 of the FMAG fires. These numbers are very low. This is what for DNR working with emergency management. These are some of the things that emergency management discovered when they were trying to put together their presidential declarations, and then also their FEMA declarations for FMAG, which is the Fire Management Assistance Grant funding. That funding is utilized for suppression costs, and we can get that from the federal agents or from FEMA when we apply for it. Then there's also a lot of other programs that come from FEMA after fire, which are the hazard mitigation grant programs, public assistance, and then also individual assistance. For the city of Malden, you've heard on the news where Malden is waiting to hear from FEMA on the declaration. So I haven't seen any new news or update on that, but just know that when we can apply for those funds to help the state, recover from some of these costs, we do it. The counties that were impacted, we have Whitman County that was hardest hit, but then you notice here that a lot of other east side counties and some west were also hit. So Okanagan, Ferry, Chelan, Douglas, Mason, the list is there. Here are the numbers that I think these have been updated with. As more damage assessments come in, those numbers do go up. So emergency management is the best info source for that. But you see here that damage from wind and fire caused 20 million in damages to utilities, 15 million to state infrastructure, and then other government and local district type infrastructure, we're looking at over 10 million. For fires this year in Washington, we had 464 structures damaged or destroyed for the fires that DNR was tracking, and 188 homes were lost. And then you guys also heard of the one civilian loss, the toddler, as a result of the Cold Springs fire. So that's it for my presentation. That's what I have there for what was going on for fires in DNR, and then also, focusing in on Chelan County, just mentioning the other fires that were on the landscape for the forest.
Great, thank you, Angie. So as a reminder for folks, the way to ask questions, you can type them into the chat or Q&A if you're in the Zoom webinar, and we'll make sure they get, I'll ask them to Angie and we'll make sure they get answered. And then if you're watching via Facebook Live, you can ask your questions in the chat or in the comments. Type them into the comments and I'll see them. But yeah, so some of the folks who work with me at Wenatchee River Institute, we are in the winter season now. So one of our questions was what marks or signs this winter can people look for that will give us a ballpark of be like in terms of fire?
Okay, so that's always a hard question, and people always want to know the answer. But it's so hard to predict what your fire season is going to look like because there are so many factors, right? And part of those are the human factor, and part of those are the natural environment. So our starts from lightning. So if you don't get all of those things lining up in a perfect, all the stars and the planets are aligned there in that with the fuels, you've got your ignition source, and then you have weather. If you don't have all those things lining up, then, even though it might be dry, maybe we don't have any ignition, or we don't have, bad weather like in 2019, then you don't see a lot of fire. So the one thing, of course, to look for is, the lowlands, your grasslands, if that's the place where things dry out first. So if you notice that you just haven't been getting the moisture over the winter, then probably your lighter fuels would be a good ignition source for sure. We work with our fuels behavior type folks and our fire weather folks at National Weather Service. So we're relying on them to give us that prediction on what the fire season might look like. We do live in the West, so we should probably always be prepared. You want to look for all those things, that you should be looking for, like, do I have fuels that are leading up into my tree canopy? Do I need to take care of that? Do I have, what's my home construction like? Is it going to be able to withstand a large wildfire? Is it built with, those materials that are fire resistant or flame resistant? And then when you are doing your burning, a lot of folks believe in what prescribed burning can do for the landscape. So, the idea is that you're doing all the right things. You're putting your burn plan together, you're getting your permits, you have enough resources on site to deal with it, even if you're just backyard burning. Do you have water on site? Are you planning on just leaving it and going grocery shopping? Or are you going to stay and man that fire until it is dead out? So those are things that we have to do.
Yeah, great, thanks. And, there were lots of fires in Washington this last summer, but there were more, I think, fires definitely in California, and then there were lots of fires in Oregon too. And you did mention that DNR will help their states. So I'm curious how that prioritization goes, if there are like more fires happening in other sort of decide when to help, when not to help.
Sure. So obviously the first thing we're going to do is look at Washington first, right? We are not going to draw down our state resources to go help somebody else if we have the same conditions that other people do. So we're going to take care of our own first. And then the one thing that everybody works towards is some sort of a coordination. So we have national coordination of resources, we have regional, coordination of resources, and local. So all of the dispatch communities and those coordination centers are all looking over the same thing that we'd be looking at. They're looking at weather, they're looking at fuels, they're looking at where are we going to get those resources, are the ones that we normally tap into starting to draw down, those kinds of things. So, and we're all communicating, all agencies, state to state, those kinds of things. And so for us, we participate in what's called the Northwest Coordination Center. So we're within this Oregon-Washington zone. And then, like I said, if our situation is good enough that we feel we can spare somebody or spare a crew or spare a helicopter, we'll do that. But we're going to be looking at our own conditions before we do that. We can't just willy-nilly just dispatch somebody just because somebody ordered us. We've got to look at what's going on in our state first.
Yeah. good to hear. So over your career, I think you mentioned, or I read in your bio that you've been working in this field for 25 years. So, what have you noticed over those 25 years in terms of fire activity in the Pacific Northwest? Like, is it increasing like we're hearing? Yeah.
I would say we're getting a lot of large fires. It seems like we have a lot of team deployments these days. And maybe this year it seemed more because, we were dealing with COVID. I don't know, but regardless, we have been having a lot of large fires. I noticed some states, Washington's sitting pretty good funding wise. We're always going to worry about money. Everybody does. But when you hear about some of the other states, it seems like budgets are starting to get stretched very, very thin. So that's going to have an impact on how many people you can hire and that kind of thing. But like I said, here in Washington, we seem to be doing okay so far. We do have a commissioner that's very active in, making sure that, by gosh, do we have money to do fuels treatment, firefighting, that training, that kind of thing. So we've been fortunate there. Also, the other thing I've noticed is, and maybe it's just because I'm not directly tied to it anymore, but the whole idea of community preparation, community protection, doing that community wildfire protection planning. Boy, that's something that you just got to stay on top of. And so I feel like that always needs to be front and center, because that's where you leverage the most people, the most partners, the most whatever. Get creative on what you can do as a community to help protect yourselves from large wildfire, because it will happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that kind of leads into the other thing I was going to ask. You mentioned all the fires that were caused by human activity, and talking about just educating the public about how to prevent fires from happening from human activity. So, Wenatchee River Institute, we're an environmental learning center, so it makes sense to help connect people to the education about how to prevent. What's the the most important thing for folks to know? How best do you think we should be educating people about fires? Because it seems like the ones you talked about in Chelan County, most of them were human caused. So it's something potentially our county needs to work on.
Yeah, definitely. Not definitely that they need to work on that, but we all do. It's just, I don't know. It's like I don't know what the thinking is lately, but it's just like, maybe it's because we've backed off. I know we don't get out there as much as we probably should, just sharing that message with everybody so that they can grab it and they can push it out to who they know. So that's something we're going to do this year. Like I said, we really want to start pushing those messages and connecting with groups like yourself so that we can, because it's like, I don't know, you tell somebody, they tell somebody, and so on and so on, and it just spreads. And so we just need to make sure, even though we don't think somebody would want to know, we should just do it anyway, because you never know who that group would be that would help like push that out, so that we can capture more people. Just utilizing social media, while that can be a powerful tool, sometimes I still think it's good to do things in person. Of course, now we're limited, but we could do a better job as a state agency and help folks, share that word. Yeah. So I think it starts with the fire agencies, and they need to just keep that front and center. What did you do with your pile burns this last winter. Did you check them? Are they out? What are you doing about getting ready for fire season with your spring cleaning and things like that? So we need to keep that out there.
Yeah, and so if you were for example, if I started a fire and I was the cause for a fire to become larger, would I be fined if it was under investigation and I was discovered to have been the cause? Would I then be fined?
There can be. I'm not the lead investigator here, but there can be repercussions, especially.
Yeah.
But they've got to make sure it was negligent. All those legal terms,
Yeah.
malicious, that kind of thing. But if it was you were discovered that you were the cause and it was accidental or something like that, we still have the we can go after costs, but there's a lot of triggers before we can do that. But it's like, well, but okay, so nobody came after costs, but from me. But the state still had to expend money, which means I'm using taxpayer dollar to do it. You know what I mean? So we're kind of all in this together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Angie, thanks so much for spending your evening with us and sharing all that information. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all the folks who tuned in tonight to listen. Yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your December, and we'll see folks in the new year.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.